Thank you all for those that are tuning in or catching up on this recording. Welcome, welcome to the room. I am Stella Gold, the CEO of My Gold Standard, and I have with me today Reena from Penny League, and I'd love for you to introduce yourself, tell us all about Penny League, and then we'll get into the land acknowledgement.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Stella, for having me. My name is Reena. I use she, her pronouns. I originally started off as I worked at tech for a long time and still kind of dabble and consult in that area. And I started off as a product manager and realized as I was kind of moving through my career and hitting certain milestones and not hitting certain milestones as well, that I didn't know anything about my money or investing. And that was actually a big part of my motivation to work with other people, specifically minority groups, women, immigrants, LGBTQ, non-binary folks, to bring them to this world of financial literacy and to really start to open the doors around having conversations on investing and finance for demographics and communities that don't typically have that option available to them. So I am one of the co-founders of Penny League. Penny League is a kind of a cohort style learning community where women and non-binary folks can get together and learn how to handle their finances and investing in really small bite-sized chunks, while also having a community of people that are also on that similar journey to ask questions and talk and really start to break that taboo and discomfort of discussing our money and investing. Yes. So thank you. Yeah. Thank you for having me.
I cannot wait to dive even deeper into all of that because there's so much to unpack. Mm-hmm. But as a non-binary person myself, and as someone that is a part of the queer community, Penny League is so needed. So I can't, we're going to dive into it. Yeah. As we, open up this conversation, I do want to honor the ancestors that are with us today and the indigenous peoples with whose land we're on. And I have had people from so many different places all around Turtle Island. But you are with me today on Ohlone, Ramaytush Ohlone territory. Mm-hmm. So we acknowledge that My Gold Standard and Penny League on the same land, yes, is located on the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Bay Area. And we honor the Ohlone and other indigenous caretakers of these lands and waters and the elders that lived here before us, the indigenous today, and the generations yet to come. And as guests, we recognize that we benefit from living and working on their traditional homeland. And we wish to pay our respects with this land acknowledgement and by affirming their sovereign rights as First Peoples. So, if you're tuning in and you're unfamiliar with whose land that you are a settler on, I invite you to look on native-land.ca. And also to look into the Land Back Initiative. And lastly, to look into paying your shumi, so your land tax. It's something that is very familiar in the Bay Area and is slowly starting to be incorporated into other cities and other areas across Turtle Island. So with that being said, I'm really excited to transition into this conversation, this very, very rich conversation, pun intended. Yes. It's not just all about investing, because investing, it taps into so many different things, but I like to kick it off asking, what's your first money memory? Because it's the first question I ask my clients. And then also every guest that I have on here, I'm like, tell me the first money memory that you have, or the one that just comes to mind.
Yeah, I think there are two that come to mind for me, which probably points to maybe some of the tension and difficulty that I had with money and investing as an adult that I've really had to unpack. So growing up as a kid, my family and I was born in England, and my family and I immigrated from England to the US. And there was a lot of moving back and forth, mostly around visas and green cards and citizenship. And my father was a scientist at the time, and he didn't make a ton of money. And so in one of these moves back to England where the visa had run out, we had to go back to England. We didn't, I remember my parents, they tried to hide it from me as best they could, but I knew, even as like a 9-10-year-old kid, I knew that things were difficult. And that they were really stretching the budget to find a place for us to live and a roof over our head while we waited for the next visa to come through, and for my dad to find another job at a national lab in the US. And so I that was probably one of my first money memories of just knowing that my parents were kind of scraping by in hopes of really like making a better life for us, for me, for themselves, and to follow their own dreams of coming to America. When I think we forget that for a lot of immigrants, it's still the dream to come to America and make something of yourself, and to make a better life for yourself and for your future generations. So that's definitely one of my first money memories. My second money memory is when I think about this question is when I was in high school. When you want to, your friends are getting cars, driver's licenses, and they're like, let's go to Starbucks and be cool.
Good old Starbucks, when Starbucks was cool.
Right. Back when Starbucks was cool. I really wanted to go to the movies. And my parents, they were just like, we can't afford to give you money to go to the movies. Like a $10 ticket, whatever it was. They were like, if you want to go see the matinee show for $5.50, you can do that. But of course it wasn't cool to see the matinee. But it was true. We really had to, it was like, you could enjoy things, but you had to enjoy within reason. And for them, that meant go see the matinee. And I think as a kid, and really in like kind of this capitalist driven society that we live in, especially in the US, you didn't want to do that. You wanted to splurge on the $10 ticket for the evening show. So yeah, those are my two money memories that kind of come from, honestly, a scarcity mindset as well.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing all that. Things that like came up for me is that I had a conversation. I think it was the home ownership with Ty. Ty of Debt Down, Assets Up.
Yes.
And we were talking about the American dream and how it can be a nightmare. It can actually be a nightmare. But when you really think about it, sometimes it is people's dream like that, and they're escaping a nightmare. Like that's how it was for my mom. So I always kind of have to carry that nuance with me. And you just like reminded me of that nuance of like, people still come here for a better life. And in some ways it is better.
Yeah.
It might not be the best. There's a lot of problems here, but
totally.
But there's just so much. So I appreciate you bringing that to light. And I also had, I had no idea that you came to the US later in childhood, that you were a little bit older.
Yeah, I was 6 the first time around, and then we moved back when I was 9 or 10 because of visa issues, and then immigrated. So I'd kind of bounced around. I lived in the Netherlands as well, so it was a lot of kind of moving around, living in tiny apartments, and really just kind of scraping by with my dad's like $40K a year salary. And which I know, I understand that for some that's still there. It's difficult to live on that now. It was difficult to live on it back then too, when inflation was less. I
know. So wild.
Yeah. That's a whole thing we can get into.
Oh my gosh. I mean, I'm like already planting that seed in my brain of kind of touching on that. Well, now that we have a bit of like your history and upbringing, what really prompted you to make that leap into the financial literacy world, and specifically focusing on the world of investing?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So I would say there are two stories that I like to tell here. They both involve my partner. One kind of is really sweet, and the other really throws him under the bus. So I'll tell both of them. There, so my partner was in banking for a decade, at all sorts of roles up and down the banking industry. And we got married when we were relatively young, as one does when you grew up in the South and have traditional Indian parents. And so we had the good fortune of being able to merge our finances very early. And I viewed that as a fortune because we could combine our finances and start to have them compound sooner and with greater frequency. And I realized that's not everyone wants to do that. And that's also has a degree of privilege to it. But I had just kind of let him handle that. And I was like, yeah, he checks credit card statements. He's the banker, and I knew that always made him really uncomfortable. He didn't like that. And so he would try to get me involved. But I was just like very oddly resistant to it because I hadn't been taught. I don't know. There's some interesting heteronormative things there, like if our society, if men do this, women do that. If I'm looking at things in a very binary sort of way, and so I fell into that until I started really questioning it. And so one day he asked me, "Oh, Reena, what do you think of this company? I'm thinking about buying stocks in it, buying shares." And I said, yeah, I've actually had a lot of experience working alongside this company. And I've interacted with their product and just what I see of technology trends, and what I know of their leadership. I think that this could be a good company to invest in and hold. Not really knowing anything about stocks or investing, but if you're just asking my opinion of a company, this is what I think of it. And so I said, great, I'll buy, 10 shares, they're yours. And I'll buy them through my Robinhood account, and I won't touch them and I won't sell them until you tell me to. Sounds great in theory. Then the pandemic happened, and he freaked, and he sold it. And he told me a month later. So he made a profit off of them. But that wasn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to just hold it for the long term. And I thought to myself, this is mine. You said this was mine. Yeah. And you went and you sold it. And so then we had a really interesting conversation. And it was actually him and another male identifying friend of ours who just said, you know what? Just open up your own at the time it was Robinhood, open up your own Robinhood account. And I was very uncomfortable. I was deeply, deeply uncomfortable with the idea of doing that. And so they literally held my hand and I did it. And my partner was like, we're just going to put in $5,000 into the account. And I remember thinking, what?
As your first time?
Yes.
That was your first time investing, I'm assuming.
On my own, yes. He had been doing, so we had already had, we had our 401ks, he had set up our robo-advisors.
So you had retirement.
We had retirement, we had robo-advisor and index funds. So we had emergency funds, savings, high yield savings accounts. He'd already done all of that. I didn't realize we'd done all of that, but that now I do. Now I know everything. Well, not everything, but and I was just like, we can put that much money into this account and have me just fiddle with it. And he was like, okay, yes. And also you need to know how much money we have. You need to know our net worth. And I mean, he said it much nicer than this. And I thought to myself, you know what? Yeah, okay. I need to figure this out. Because if I consider myself to care about equality and feminism and equal rights and all of this other stuff in a variety of different spectrums and lenses and areas of intersectionality, I have to care as an immigrant, as a queer woman of color. I have to care about these things. And there's nothing more than like financial empowerment, because I think it's being able to understand your money gives you power. And I think we need to put more power in the hands of minority groups who understand what problems that they face for their own communities, and give them the power to be able to make those decisions and to solve things for themselves. So I ended up saying, yeah, you know what? I have to care about this. I think I can do a better job than him. And also it was a pandemic, so I had this freak out, and I was 30 at the time. And I thought, what happens if he dies? And it's like a very morbid thing to think about, but I
mean, it is important to think about, even though it's very
yeah,
doom and gloom.
it is. But in some ways it feels easier to think about that when you're younger. It's paradoxically, I guess, like I found it easier to think, what happens if he gets hit by a bus tomorrow, or he catches COVID or something? Do I know what accounts we have? Do I know what the passwords are to those?
Oof.
Are we each other's beneficiaries? Will I know what to do? Do I even, just all of that?
Yeah.
And I think that this is a problem that is actually very pervasive. You see this a lot with our parents' generation.
Literally, this happened with my mom. My dad died out of nowhere. And she was like, so I don't what do we do, or Stella, what do we do? And I was like, I don't know. You're my mom.
Yeah.
And it wasn't her fault, because she is, immigrant, Filipina person of color that kind of was like, oh, my husband's going to figure it out. So when husband is gone, what happens?
What do you do?
So seeing you take that agency is really inspiring.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, I've noticed it with my dad said this to me recently. He was like, if something happens to me, I need to sit you down before that happens. I need to sit you down and tell you where all of our accounts are and what they are, because your mom is going to need help. And I'm happy to do that. And I want to empower my mom as well. Like they say, when you're starting a business or building a product, they sometimes joke around and say, like, you should be able to get your mom or your grandma to be able to use this. Right. And so I think about that as well, of how can I make something like finances or investing so easy and simple to learn and to talk about, that even my mother or my grandmother could have done it. So there's that. And I noticed the same thing with my grandmother when she passed away just a couple months ago. She was already a widow, and we didn't know. We had to go and figure out, does she have any bank accounts that we weren't aware of? Whose name is the house title in? She didn't have a will. And it's made things very complicated, actually, and that we don't know if there's money being left behind, and we don't actually know what her true intentions were with what she did leave behind, mostly the house. Did she want it sold? Did she want it kept? Did she want it given to me, to one of the cousins? We don't know any of that. And we only, I wish we could have represented her life after her death in the way that she wanted to, but we just don't know. So I think it's really important. I think motivation is really key. Everyone has their own motivation for why they choose to be financially literate. And I think it's really important for each person to do that soul searching and to look inside themselves and say, why is it? Because it's scary and daunting to be financially literate and to start investing. But I truly believe that you have to do that. And you have to also find your own personal motivation to do it, because there are a lot of areas of resistance that will stop you along the way.
Absolutely. It's so wild that you're bringing this up, because when a client does come to work with me, I ask them, all right, like, now that we're here, what's your money mission statement? Like, what is your money mission in this life that you have? Right. However, before I hopped on this call, like, I had a meeting with a client, and she had told me, like, oh, like, do you think I could really start investing soon? And I'm like, yeah, like, absolutely. And she's like, well, I don't even know. She's like, I have no idea where to even begin on that journey, period. And I told her, like, there's another financial educator that, oh my gosh, I am just blanking on what her business is called. It's Riqueza Wealth. Oh my gosh. I will link it in the bio, but her name's Leah, and she says, don't invest in things that you don't understand. And I
Mhm.
actually really, I really vibe with that. And
Yes.
I told that to my client. I was like, if you don't know, that's okay. So what do you want to understand? Like,
Mhm.
what is your motivation? Like, why do you want to invest?
Mhm.
Because obviously I feel like investing is an absolute must. And I am
Same.
curious, well, let's backtrack because now figuring out, okay, what's my motivation? Let's do some soul searching. And you said that there's like resistance. So what
Mhm.
are the common misconceptions about investing
Ooh,
from
yes.
your personal experience or like hearing people in your community? Like
Yes.
what is that?
Misconceptions. You said misconceptions around investing?
Yeah. And
I
I think
actually,
that could
yeah,
go into the resistance, right? That people
totally.
feel.
Yeah, I think so. I've in my time of doing this, because after I went through that experience of thinking, why do I not know this information, and imagining my husband dying, um,
Sorry,
I
not funny.
I mean, kind of, but right? Yeah, not funny, but also, I started talking to a lot of people. I started talking to women, to non-binary folks, to men, as like just of different married people, not married, partnered, divorced, just to understand how do they think about money. And it was interesting to hear that, especially those that are usually women or femme or non-binary or come from some other marginalized group like immigrants, or part of the LGBTQ community, there were certain misconceptions. You see it in the with men as well. And I'm just kind of, I know I'm not trying to blanket men into one category, but they are less likely to be vocal about it. But some of the
Mhm.
misconceptions that I've heard along underserved communities is the number one was this need to be an expert. You mentioned earlier that it's important to invest in the things that you know, and I do agree with that.
Mhm.
I have a lot of friends who are like, oh, I'm thinking about buying this stock. And it's like, okay, well, do you understand the stock market? Do you understand
Mhm.
how you should think about picking a stock? Or I want to invest in crypto. Okay, do you understand what cryptocurrency is, and do you know what blockchain is? And it's like you said, it's okay to not know,
Mhm.
but if you want to invest in it, you can't properly assess the risks and your own risk tolerance to that asset unless
Mhm.
you understand what it is and what it does. Um, so there's this misconception that you need to be an expert as a result, when in reality, I think there's there's a lot of jargon that acts as a gatekeeper.
Oh, absolutely.
So I went to a liberal
Yeah.
arts school for college, and I studied psychology and physics, and minored in physics. And I actually then went to work at Cisco Systems as a network engineer. And a lot of people thought it was bonkers that I studied psychology and then did something like a hard thing, like or a technical thing like network engineering, when in
Yeah.
reality, all of these things, whether it's network engineering or computer science or finances or data analysis, these things that are hard things that we kind of attribute to men in our
Mhm.
society more than women. Um, it's really just, there's just a lot of jargon. There are a lot of words, and there's a lot of gatekeeping to make it difficult for people to enter any of these industries. And having had a liberal arts education, I realized it's just about, can you ask the right questions? Are you willing to ask the right questions? Are you willing to maybe look stupid and have someone say, oh, that was a dumb question, and have the confidence to say you're rude and ask someone else, right? Like, that's
Yeah.
really hard. But I think you don't have to be an expert, but you have to
Mhm.
be willing to push past the discomfort of not knowing something and the
Mm.
discomfort of feeling kind of dumb. Newsflash, you're not
Mhm.
dumb. And finding someone that you could ask a question to, right? Whether it's, your parents or a friend, or your partner or partners, or just saying, you know what, I'm going to look this word up, and I'm probably going to find 5 more words that I don't know. And I'm not going to panic. I'm just going to say, okay, here are 5 more words. and maybe I'll look up a YouTube video on it or something, right?
Yes.
And know that 20% of it will get you 80% of the way there. There's a lot of
Mm.
nuance, right, in finance and investing, but for the everyday
Yeah.
investor, you can learn 20% of it and get yourself 80% of the way there. So I think that is one of the biggest misconceptions. There are others too. Um, I think a lot of people think investing is day trading. And it's like, that's actually not what investing
I am like,
is.
I mean, it could be, but
It could
I'm
be.
like, I have dreams one day of having the, maybe not being like an expert, because I love what you said, because I did find her.
Oh, cool.
Leah, she does the Riqueza Collective. So
Okay.
Riqueza means wealth in Spanish.
Okay.
She's amazing. She's awesome. And now I want to have a conversation with her and be like, so do you like, what is your definition of understanding something? Because
Mm-hmm.
she's very much about investing too. And you're so right. People do shy away from not being experts. I see this specifically with, oh my gosh, it's just like coming full circle for me, but with women and femmes and,
Mm-hmm.
um, people that aren't like the cis het patriarchy, because for example, men will apply for a job, right? That
Mm-hmm.
is, they're like, oh, I do like 2 or 3 out of the 5
Yep.
requirements. And women or femmes or pretty much people that aren't the cis het patriarchy, cis het white patriarchy, they're like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I don't qualify. So it's almost like, oh, I'm disqualified from investing because I don't understand everything about it.
Mm-hmm.
So you're so right. It's like, how can we soften that? And I love that you were talking about building resilience, building risk tolerance, because I just posted about this, the window of resilience. And
Yes.
in my last, I did a presentation for this company, and one of the participants was like, how do you manage risk when you're a new investor? I was like, I was like, you mean emotionally, right? Because you can't manage how
Mm,
risky the market is, because
right. There's
it's
so
just
many
going to do
factors at
its,
play.
exactly. It's just going to do its thing.
It's
It's
going to
more
do
like,
its thing. Yeah.
how do you anchor yourself emotionally in building your own window of resilience,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I really love that you touched base on that. I really love that
Yeah.
you touched base on that.
Yeah, I think I love the window of resilience. I think we often talk about it in terms of maybe in your emotional life or in your relationships, or but not, I
Mm-hmm.
haven't, thought about it in terms of financially. But I think that's a
Yeah.
great way to talk about this concept of risk, right? A lot
Yeah.
of people think, oh, well, investing is just too risky. It's like, yes, but with risk also comes trade-offs, right? By not
Mm-hmm.
taking some amount of risk of whatever you can stomach, or
Mm-hmm.
tolerate, or have be resilient for, you're going to miss out on something, and that
Mm-hmm.
is risky as well.
Yeah, there's a risk in not investing already.
Right, there's a risk in not investing in yourself. There's a risk
Mm-hmm.
in not choosing to invest in yourself, intellectually, emotionally, physically, spiritually, right? In order to make gains, you have to risk something, but it is
Mm.
about being able to take small risks a little at a time, kind of as your
Yeah.
like resiliency, your window kind of starts to open up, and also educating yourself along the way, and knowing that you don't have to, it can feel like drinking from a fire hose, but you don't have to drink from a fire hose. Which is why I think another investing misconception is it's too late for me. A
Oof.
lot of people, a lot of women and femmes especially, say it's too late for me. I'm 35 and I still don't know it, and I should have started investing. I fall into this trap. I went with a couple of years where I didn't have a 401k,
Mm.
and I had a couple of years very earlier on where I did, and then I had a couple of years where I didn't. And I spent then another year subsequently emotionally beating myself up about it. And that was, I eventually just got to a point and said, you know what? Better late than never. and I just started investing, maxing out my IRA, as to the best
Yes.
that I could, depending on what my income was like. But I knew that I could either just sit here and beat myself up about the years that I missed out on, or I could just do it now. There is always the benefit of time is on your side. So the younger you are,
Absolutely.
that you
Yeah.
can just start to do a little bit and let that compound is better, but it's never too late. Like just do something.
Yeah. It really isn't like I do think that I had a moment with myself where I looked at how much if I had started investing, 10 years ago when I got my first, big kid job, um, what would that money look like? And it almost like it hurts to see that number, but it excited me. It was like, oh, so I could have that in 10 years, and that's, at least I'm not losing that opportunity anymore. At least
Yeah.
I'm opening that door for myself. I do want to switch gears a little bit and talk about, do you believe investing is an absolute necessity, specifically in growing your wealth and closing or getting it closer to closing the racial, gender, the LGBTQIA plus wealth gaps? And I'm sure there's so many other wealth gaps too, which is unfortunate. But do you think it's a need? Like it's an absolute need, it's a necessity?
Yes. Yeah, I do. It's tough, right? I mean, we can talk about investing. How do you invest with your values as well, which I think is also really, really difficult.
Yeah. I mean, let's tie into that a little bit, because
Yeah.
they both kind of feed each other.
Definitely. I do think that sometimes I hear this a lot from minorities, that they're like, well, I don't want to invest because like, oh, I feel crummy about the stock market and things like that. It's like, yes. And I don't see how we can make strides towards closing the wealth gap across all sorts of different demographics if we don't start investing. Because not only are we, if women make, 72 cents to a man's dollar, right? And we're not even taking into consideration like all the other things, race and immigration status or whatever, right? You are not only missing out on that money of the difference from salary, men are also taking that money and investing it. Now, there have been plenty of studies that show that women actually make, and again, I know this is very binary.
It's just what the data is.
The data
unfortunately
just cuts it in terms of men and women and not including other genders and sexualities and expressions. But if women on average actually have a slightly higher percentage of investment returns in the long run than men do. And there've been lots of studies that show this, much to the trolls of Instagram's chagrin. And so it's actually really beneficial for women to start investing, and investing for the long term and investing without this panic when the market goes up or down, because we do see better results in the long run. But if men are already investing and they're already making more money, that gap just ends up increasing over time. And so I think that if women do on average make for better investors, investing ends up helping close some of that gap, because we're able to make more sound decisions, and we actually just kind of leave our money alone when we do invest, right? Case in point with my partner selling that stock in a downturn when I would have just left it alone. That stock ended up, I think, quadrupling, even with some of the dips that have happened. So I think and that's just the short run. Who knows what it could be in the long run? So I do believe that you have to invest. Like, especially if you are a woman or a femme, non-binary, LGBTQIA immigrant, as best as you can. I understand it can be very difficult if you were living paycheck to paycheck.
Mhm.
I know I've experienced periods of that. I know it's very difficult. I'm super eager to max out my IRA this year. And yet, due to some circumstances, my husband and I are having to fill up the emergency fund first. And that's, there are things like that you have to do. But if
Yeah.
you can even just do little things like max out your 401k or max out your IRA, even those
Yeah.
are elements of investing that you can do that
Mhm.
are going to help you for the long run, that are going to help you save on taxes, contributing to your IRA. A lot of people don't realize like that can actually really help lower your tax bill.
Is this your,
Now.
to clarify for our audience, you're
Mhm.
talking about a traditional
Yes,
IRA.
I am talking
So
about a
on
traditional
top
IRA.
of a 401k
Mhm.
that's employee sponsored.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because if there are ways that you can then reduce your tax bill as well, and you can get a refund, and that's money that you can then take and reinvest, or
Mm-hmm.
put towards your emergency account or anything else, or just like your fuck it fund or whatever you want.
Yeah.
So I do think that you have to find a way to invest. And I think, again, this goes to that investing misconceptions, or things that I wish that I had known, is that you can just start small. Um, and
Yes.
and the little things consistently over time, right? It's like meditation. You can't just be really good
Yeah.
at meditating one day. You have to show up every day for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And eventually, after 30 days, 60 days, you start to notice some changes in your brain. And a lot of
Yeah.
folks won't make it that long. But if you can, but it's like working out. It's like
It's
anything else that you do, you just have to show up consistently.
exactly. And I feel like for some, right, they're like, oh, I need to have a lot of money
Right.
to invest. And I'm like, $5 a week, let's go.
That's it.
Even if it's $10 a
Mhm.
month, whatever. Like as long as you're trying and you're inching towards that, that's something that you can just build up over time.
Mhm.
You're making movement versus staying stagnant.
Right.
So whenever people, that you're so right, that is a common misconception and something that I wish I knew like 10 years ago. Like I could have been investing $5-10,
Mhm.
right?
Right. And with so many of these apps, and there are more and more, I swear, there are more and more every week, where of some
So
new app
many.
that targets a new demographic in some new way of like, oh, well, we do fractional investing and we do it in this kind of way where we give you this information about these companies. Um, there's so many ways to do it now,
Mhm.
which, it's a blessing and a curse, right? Companies like really Robinhood that kind of
Yeah.
paved the way for everyone to be an investor, but with great power came great responsibility, and everyone became an investor, and yet no one was educated on how to actually invest. Um,
Yeah.
so it is very feasible, but it really is, like we said earlier, you have to start small, and you should learn along the way, and be
Yeah.
willing and okay with making mistakes, because if you are starting small,
Yeah.
those
It's
mistakes don't hurt as much.
exactly. It's like, don't invest what you can't lose, I guess. What you can't afford to lose is a term that I've heard people say in the finance industry.
I
Um,
Yeah, I have mixed feelings about that.
yeah.
I hear that a lot, and I think
Hmm.
that's like it's like kind of like it's like a Cliff Notes version, I think, right?
Yeah, the
Like,
way that they're saying it is saying like, oh, it's like viewing it as investing as gambling. And it's like, well,
mhm,
no, it's more of like just if you're doing like $5-10, it's more of like, okay, yeah, like this mistake won't really hurt you.
right.
This is
I don't.
you can afford to lose, hopefully, $5-10. If you're
Mhm,
not there, there's no shame in that.
right.
But oops,
Because
yeah,
hopefully you're also saving, right? You bring
exactly.
some money towards a high yield savings account or something. I do think that, especially with buying individual stock and
Hmm.
buying crypto or some of these alternative assets, NFTs, I do think you have to be willing to be okay with possibly losing some of that money, if not all of that money. And I think that's where, you know, understanding kind of the risk that you like, tolerance that you have, as well as how risky something is considered as an asset, is really important. So like for me, I would say like, I like to use robo advisors because it takes a lot of the thought out of it. And I also really like
I am
index
so all about, I feel like both take so much thought out. It's like everything's diversified on autopilot.
It's on autopilot.
We're good to go.
Yeah.
I'm like the laziest investor ever.
Being a lazy investor is actually so much better than
Is
being
that
an
like
active
an
investor.
Instagram handle? Like
The lazy
investor?
Maybe we should rebrand to the lazy investor.
Wait, Reena.
That might actually be really good. The lazy investor.
Yo, I'm here for that.
Yeah,
because it just,
I love that.
You're seeing this live. This is how our conversations are live, but I'm here for that.
I mean, we've been wanting to change our name, so maybe the lazy investor is what we're going to change it to.
Okay, before I lose my train of thought, because we're going to have to talk about this.
Yes.
And because I'm like, boo, 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 all these ideas are coming into my head.
I love it.
Get that domain. What a misconception that you talked about, brief, like kind of, we didn't dive into it too much, but this idea that if you don't have a fully funded emergency fund, or if you don't have if you didn't pay off like all your debt, let's not even consider student loans or any of that. Let's just talk like credit card debt. Yeah. Cause like student loans, we don't know.
Yeah. It's so difficult.
Do you think that, let's say someone doesn't have like an emergency fund yet, or but aren't working on it, or maybe, you know, there is high interest credit cards. Like, do you think it's an either or? I have my opinion, but I want to hear yours.
Yeah. And I'd be really curious to hear yours as well. You know, knowing full and well, this is not financial advice.
Yeah. Our lawyers got to say that.
Say that. This is not financial advice. Please seek financial counseling. Credit card debt, I am actually of the opinion, I really believe that you should, and I don't like speaking in shoulds, pay off the credit card debt before you invest. Okay. I really, I know. And I think I'm assuming that your credit card debt is is a high percentage, a high APY, right? So
that's like where the nuance comes in, where I'd be like, well, what is the interest rate?
Yeah.
Is
it 0%?
Yeah. You know. Like you have time, invest and pay off the debt.
Right.
But if the interest is so high where it's
starting to
the market isn't even going to catch up to that, then I'm like,
and I think that's the general rule of thumb that you hear a lot, that I actually think is pretty sound, of that. If you can assume a 7 on average, right? There are going to be some years where you don't, but if you're investing in index funds, if you can assume a 7%, you know, rate if return on investment, and your interest rate is lower than that, you should spend some time investing, because that could help pay off some of that debt. Now that's dependent on what your interest, you know, what your interest rates are on your credit cards. You know, I know people, I have dear friends of mine that have very high interest rates on their credit cards, and they're just carrying this balance over $1,000, $2,000 month after month. And they're like, oh yeah, well, I put $500 towards it. It's like, well, eventually you will have, that will just creep back up to $1,000, right? If you're not paying it off consistently. And before you know it, you've paid 2, 3, 5 times more than what that original amount was.
Yeah.
And there's a really great, Netflix had like a Money Explained series.
Ooh, I love that episode.
There was one on credit cards that they did a really great infographic of how much you've actually paid. And they did it with like, maybe you bought a new refrigerator or something like that.
Mhm.
I thought that was a really great infographic that showed just how much money you end up paying the credit card
Mhm.
company, because a lot of credit card companies, they're able to offer perks because they prey on those who can't pay off their
That's
statement.
where, that's where
That's where it
exactly,
feels
that's
gross.
where it's gross.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I mean, for those that are in a place where they can leverage that and can manage, their money and use that to their benefit, great, cool. Like I'm one of those people.
Yeah, same.
I do have credit card debt. They're all on 0%, and I was very strategic. So that's another
Mm-hmm.
thing, like debt can be leveraged. I leveraged that debt. Could I have paid that off by now? Absolutely. I have just chosen not to because it's
Mm-hmm.
0%. There's no fees. So
Yeah.
I'm taking any expendable cash that I have and putting that into, right now, I'm putting it into crypto and NFTs.
Oh,
So because
okay.
I had
Talk about that.
already dipped my toes into different stocks,
Mm-hmm.
I haven't done index funds yet, but I have done ETFs. So the
Mm-hmm.
robo advisor, just checking it there, being like,
Mm-hmm.
you do you, boo. I know you're working hard for
Yes.
me. That's
Yes.
how I feel about that. But I haven't also 10 years ago, I wish that I just like the word crypto, like it wasn't
Mm-hmm.
even crypto. It was like the word Bitcoin came to my face. And I was just like, no, we're not, I don't even, I don't even know what a 401k is. All right,
Right.
bro.
Yeah.
Like, don't
Yeah.
talk to me about crypto. It was like, I mean, it's the hype now, but it was like, I mean, the hype back then was
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
quadrupled. And I kind of wish that I took $5 here and there and just was like,
Mm-hmm.
because now what Bitcoin is, I
Yeah,
don't even,
it's like 60 grand or
I
something
know.
ridiculous. Just some absurd
I'd
amount.
be a
I know.
crypto zillionaire. So I
Yeah.
want to
And some
hear
people
what
are
I want to hear what your thoughts are around that. Crypto, NFTs, that
NFTs.
whole world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have a lot of thoughts around this. I, I think what's interesting about NFTs is that and crypto, but I'm gonna, I guess, really focus on NFTs is that it is hype, right?
Mhm.
Um, but that doesn't mean that you can't make money off of hype. I
I
think you
mean,
can,
we make money off of hype all the time.
right?
Starbucks.
Yeah, yeah,
That was the big hype back in the day.
yeah. I mean, it definitely was though, right? Like, there is plenty of opportunity to make money off of hype. I think you just have to be educated in it to some degree, and also
Mm,
say, okay, at what point, how much of my portfolio do I want hype to be part of, as opposed to something that's perhaps, some like something like a robo advisor where it's just kind of doing its own thing. But now I want to
yeah.
have maybe 5 or 10% of my portfolio dabble in this, where then you say, okay, my window of resilience is increasing a little bit. I want to take a strategic risk. And I want to dabble in this hype because who knows? Like,
Yeah.
so I do think it's such early days, especially with NFTs, that
Hmm.
that makes it both really, really scary, but also
Hmm.
really, really exciting.
Yeah.
I think the argument for NFTs is that it's a new asset class in a lot of ways,
Hmm.
right? This kind of concept of digital art or digital goods, that ends up allowing, when you have a new asset class, underserved communities and minorities have an opportunity to kind of dive in, because everything in a lot of ways is a level playing field. And what I think is
Yeah.
really
And
cool
it's
about
not regulated.
it's not regulated either,
Yeah.
which is also why you do have to be really careful.
Yeah.
There is a lot of scamming that's happening in crypto and NFTs with like OpenSea and these other marketplaces where NFTs are being
Mm.
bought. A lot of Discord communities that are unregulated, where people will kind of accidentally share their wallet password and
I've had to
lose.
be very careful with
You have to
that.
be
I had
very
so
careful.
many scammers slide into
Mhm,
my DMs, and
mhm.
I didn't even know that you had the opportunity to um not allow direct messages to yourself.
Mm.
Random scammers are inviting me to their
Mhm.
discords. I'm like, no, thank you.
And so, yeah. So it goes back to the thing that we said earlier of like, you don't need to be an expert, but you do need to understand how things work. Of, what is blockchain, right? And it's,
Mhm.
I think, again, it goes back to that gatekeeping of jargon. It's, anyone can figure this out. If I studied psychology at a liberal arts school and then went and like understood like network engineering and blockchain, like
Mhm.
it is doable. It's just about finding the right teacher and the right way of
Yes.
learning and asking the right questions. But you do need to
Yeah.
understand blockchain. You do need to understand what cryptocurrency is. You do need to understand wallets and wallet passwords and
Mhm.
security, basic security. What does phishing look like? What does scamming
Mhm.
look like? So that
So you
you can
can be
educate
vigilant.
yourself. So you can be
Yes.
vigilant. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what I really love about the NFT space though, is that, as I mentioned, that it being a new asset class, I think there is an opportunity for minorities to get involved. And you are seeing a lot of communities of color. There's like hijabi queens NFT. There's some around Sikhs. So my family is of the Sikhism faith.
Mhm.
And there's a whole NFT collection around that to bring people of our community together and celebrate our heritage and our culture. And so I think this is a really incredible way to, if you do have means of wealth, right? If you do
Mhm.
have money, this can be a really incredible way for you to support maybe a community of interest, the LGBTQIA community, the neurodivergent community. You can support creators of those communities that are producing and minting these NFTs that celebrate them. Whether they're Muslim women or non-binary or anything, you can put
Mhm.
your money towards them and support their content. And what's really amazing about some of these communities, if you do find the good ones, they actually get the people who do invest and purchase NFTs, they create educational content for them as well.
Yes.
So there's Curious Addies, there's all these NFT groups, there's the hug.xyz,
Ooh, I
that,
don't think I know that one.
yeah, that are really interesting. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to make these spaces available to those that have traditionally been left behind in the investing world, right? Which is pretty much anyone
Mhm.
that's not a cis het white man. But being very intentional about it and providing them with educational opportunities so that if you don't know about how to mint or how to procure an NFT or why you would do it, they're actually breaking all of that down. And the proceeds that they take from the NFTs they sell, they will often donate to charitable causes that they are
Yeah.
supporting.
They redistribute their
They
wealth.
redistribute their wealth to the community that they've all bought into, right? This almost like
Mhm.
distributed like DAOs, so to speak. So I think that I'm actually really interested. I'll be honest with you, I don't own any NFTs yet. But I actually want to create my own NFTs. Want to create an NFT collection this year,
Yes.
which I think would be really interesting for me because I learned by doing, and
I
I
am the
want to.
same way.
And
Yeah.
that's why investing as well, why we say invest a little bit at a time and just dabble here and there, because you will understand how things work when you
Yeah.
do, but you don't just throw all your money into it, right?
That's so
Um,
true. Cause like, yeah, investing is also, it's an action.
mhm,
I'm the same way. Like I
it
learned by
is, yeah.
doing. So in a way, it's like I have to be comfortable with not understanding something
Mhm.
completely. I actually got my first NFT today.
Oh, cool. Okay, which
Yeah.
one?
So I did join the BFF
Okay.
Discord and went to that event because it was, very like, I think it was focused on like, what was it called? It was like crypto curious.
Mhm.
Maj was there and I love Maj. They are I don't know if they're the CEO or the founder of BeautyCon, I
Okay.
believe. But they are a queer, non-binary person of color. And I just was like obsessed that they were in that space.
Mhm.
So I went and saw them speak about NFTs and cryptocurrencies. And It was the first Discord that I had been, because I had been since last spring. Oh my God, so wild. Since April 2021, learning about this.
Mhm.
And
you took your time with it.
And I took my time because I was like,
Yeah.
one, I am not a place where I can afford to lose whatever I put here.
Mhm.
So I was also building to get to a place where I could be more financially, like I had a foundation of income, because I'm an entrepreneur, as you know, like I just started my business 2 years ago. And now that I am, I was like, oh, and they're dropping their collection, and they gave me a free bracelet for attending the event as a
Oh, nice.
pass to mint this NFT.
Ah, okay.
And that's when I got this bracelet, people were bidding like 1 ETH, even 2 ETH on my bracelet, which is like 3 grand, 4 grand.
Chunk, yeah, sizable chunk.
And so the fact that there was all this demand, of course, like I know through this Discord and through this community, I felt comfortable to ask stupid questions. I was like, hey, sorry, I'm new here. And I felt like kind of like my ego, because I was like, I'm supposed to be a financial expert. So I had to really humble myself.
Yeah. I think that's a great example though, right? Like there's so much to learn in the finance and investing space. There are people who dedicate their whole lives to this, and they get certified and accredited and all this other stuff, and they study it in college, and they do investment banking. And there's so you can get into that nuance, right? And as new technologies get created, we end up having, that's what I think is so interesting about the NFT space, is that it's so nascent that even the people that are in it are trying to figure out what it is and what are all the use cases of it, which makes it really exciting and scary, and also a great opportunity for you to dive, for anyone, honestly, for all of us to dive in, right? Even if it's just to kind of poke around the internet and like watch a YouTube video or something. And
YouTube University.
Check your resources, right? Check the site,
Yeah.
there are plenty of crackpots out there too. But it's a great opportunity to go and just you can just creep for a little bit. Twitter.
I was a creep for a whole ass year.
I'm still creeping. A friend of mine, who's now a co-founder along with Randy Zuckerberg, for the hug.xyz, that's focusing on bringing in anyone that's typically been left, basically anyone who's not a cis het white man. She
looking that up right now.
Yeah, Debbie. She and I had actually been working together last year on co-founding another company. And she, after she shut down her startup in December, she just was like, what's going on with Web3 and NFTs? And just dove in and asked lots of questions, and was really welcomed and embraced with open arms, and bumped into randomly Randy Zuckerberg was like, hey, I see you're really interested in this. Do you want to be interested with me? And then she's now a co-founder of this Web3 community. And this was
I'm looking at all of this, and I'm just obsessed now.
I really love what they're doing. I'm really intrigued and curious by it. I also really love what Curious Addies has been doing. And so these are communities that are being created by minorities, right? Whether they're women or women of color or LGBTQIA. These are people who are coming from minority groups. That's why I love the Seek Metaverse NFT collection. Why I love the Hijabi Queens collection is that they are creating a space and saying, you know what, we're tired of being left out of these conversations, and we are purposefully going to create a space that's for us, and we're going to learn and teach each other so that we can grow our wealth together.
Like they want to be one of the firsts now. They're like, we're not gonna
be left behind,
the last again. No,
absolutely not. And that's what I love about Debbie, right? Is that she, 4 months ago, she knew nothing about Web3, absolutely nothing. And she just let her curiosity guide her, and look at where it's taken her, right? She's now co-founding something that is I'm really excited to see where it goes. And she's having a great time. And I think that is really, what I would tell people, of just like, just, if you want to lurk, if you want to ask questions. There are communities out there that will do you wrong, and there are communities out there that will do you right. And just be cautiously optimistic.
Absolutely. Well, as we wrap up, I do want to speak to the part about how can a person align their investments with their values? Like, these are all examples of how to do that, right? Because you said something about like the stock market, for example, isn't the only way to show it isn't the US economy, right? And NFTs, crypto, this is a whole economy that's not even being shown to us unless we really seek it out, because it hasn't been incorporated completely into, our collective economy. So, I do, and we did touch base on redistributing wealth, taking what you get as your return on your investments, for example, and doing good with that money, and how, women and femmes, non-binary folks are the people that are doing that. So yeah, do you have anything to say about that before we wrap up? Because my last question would be, and we kind of talked about this, but I want to talk to two different investors, a new investor and a current investor, and I want to give them one action they can take.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah.
It's funny. I really struggled with that question. Just a quick note on investing with your values. I do think that it can be really, really difficult, right? Like, so I think the one thing I would say about investing with your values is my therapist says this all the time, it's to practice gray thinking, and to not view the world as so black and white, right? Where it's
the nuance.
It's so much about nuance. So, a lot of folks will say like, oh, I'll invest in those companies that have a high ESG rating, environmental social governance rating. But you have companies like Pepsi and Coca-Cola and, cigarette companies and Amazon that actually score pretty high.
Amazon is very high on an ESG rating.
Yeah. The ESG ratings, that is actually really a whole other conversation we could get into. But it's a lot of ESG ratings are based off of how well a company will still continue to do financially based off of these ESG markers. So it's not really a good way to rate something. So BP actually has British Petroleum has a decent ESG rating, despite the fact that they're big oil.
They're literally petroleum.
It's in their name. And in some ways you could say, well, yeah, it's because after they had that massive oil spill along the Gulf Coast, they spent millions upon millions of dollars rebuilding the Gulf Shore's beaches, and they're now better than they were before. But you're still big oil, right? And it's like, well, cigarette companies are like, well, we're trying to teach people
we're using organic tobacco,
right? It's like, we don't use child labor to pick the tobacco. And it's like, great, like that should just be a thing already. And same with Amazon. And Amazon does tons and tons of environmental good in terms of carbon offsetting pretty much everything they do. And they have terrible, predatory pricing and terrible labor practices, right? So I think, and you could even say this with NFTs as well, and crypto.
Absolutely.
That there are some cryptocurrencies that take up so much electric power. And the act of minting an NFT or making a transaction, right? And that's why you're seeing more and more cryptocurrencies that say, well, our environmental impact and footprint is significantly less than Bitcoin, and why Ethereum is trying to change. So I think you have to use, so my advice, my perspective, I'm not going to say advice because it's not financial advice. My perspective is that you should practice nuanced gray thinking about how you invest with your values, that you are never going to I don't think you can really tick every single box. I think just with the way financial institutions work and all of that, it's never going to be perfect. And so you have to understand what battles do you want to pick and choose, and how can you perhaps, with the money that you do make with your investments, redistribute that wealth to causes and communities that you care about.
Absolutely. That is one that I finally was able to, that was a mountain for
Mhm.
me that I
Same.
had to move aside and be like, you know what?
And I think
The
you
world
were a
is
big,
so nuanced.
yeah, I remember reading one of your, I think it was one of your money love letters that where you
Mhm.
talked about this, and it really shaped me as well. Like I walked
Yeah.
away from that being like, yes, like I can't, I'm someone that wanted, when throughout my teens and 20s, wanted to fight every battle and realized that I can't do that. I can't sustain it. And so it's that whole thing of like, well, let me get a seat at the table. And a lot of us, we have a scarcity mindset. So we get a seat at the table and we continue to shove other people down, but you can
Mhm.
flip that narrative and have an abundant mindset and get that seat at the table, whether it's in your career or in your investments or wherever, in your love life, wherever,
Mhm.
and say, well, I'm going to bring the next person up. You can
Yeah.
do that. You can make that choice. And I think that's how you can really live in your values as you invest.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that. Now for our
Yeah. Last
last
question.
question.
Yes. Oh, so what would I tell a new investor, and to
Yeah,
do, and
like
what would I tell?
what this is not financial advice, but yeah, if like a person's like watching this, they are, let's just like create this person. This
Okay.
person is really anxious, has very, very like zero risk tolerance. They know that they
Mm,
want to invest because their motivation is to build generational wealth, but
mhm,
they don't even know where to start. They get really overwhelmed. They're anxious. So they get into kind of like a freeze response when it comes to
mhm,
actually investing.
mhm.
So what is one step that person can take as a new investor?
Um, I this one's tough because I feel like for what I hear, where I hear in this person is the anxiety piece of it.
Yeah.
And so part of me is like, maybe get a therapist. That's, or someone that's like trauma informed,
Yeah.
that can really help you kind of work through some of that stuff that's tangled up inside of you. If
Yeah.
that's not it, if I didn't give that as a suggestion, I would say, I would have someone that is, and this is, I was that person that had a lot of anxiety. I had so much anxiety that I had
Mm-hmm.
left my old 401k accounts with my old employers, which is something you can do if you want to. Although you just
Not
need to,
advised.
I don't recommend it. But as long as, okay, that's again, that's a
Yeah,
whole
no,
other
that's a whole
discussion.
other thing.
Um,
Okay.
I
So
I had huge like fear around rolling over my 401k, and I had to have my husband hold my hand practically and be like, okay, this is the number you're going to call. I'm going to be right here and I'm not going to leave until you do it. And it was
mhm.
almost like I had such an extreme accountability buddy
Yeah.
that it got done. And
That's
after
what
I
I
got,
do. I literally am like on a video chat telling my client, I'm like, we're doing this
we're
now.
doing this now, right? Because if it's something you really do want to do, I'm sorry,
Mhm.
but my therapist says this
Ooh,
all the time. You can't wait for the anxiety to be gone in order for you to take the action. You
it's
have to
not gonna
feel
be
the anxiety.
done.
It's not going to be gone. You have to feel the
Yeah.
anxiety and do it anyways, right? That whole book, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyways.
Yeah.
Yeah, feel the fucking fear and do it anyways. And I know that's easier said than done, but your
Actually,
anxiety won't go away. Just have someone just shove you
that's,
into doing it.
I think that is the best step, is finding an accountability
Mm-hmm,
person
mm-hmm.
to do the activity with you. So in
Yeah.
this case, that activity is investing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I had a friend who was like, Marina, I loved your article about what to do with my old 401ks, but I still don't think I'm going to do it unless you sit down next to me and do it with me. And I was like, okay, I'll do
You're
it with
like,
you,
let's go.
but you got to tell me when. She hasn't told me when yet. Um, but yeah, right.
Yeah.
So
Well,
accountability.
what about like current investors?
Mm. Current investors, should we paint another picture, or should I just blanket
I think this
suggestion?
person has, they've done just general investing. They're not getting too deep into alternative investing, but they've invested. They're not so scared about the active investing. They
Mm,
know they have a level of um they have built their window of resilience around investing. Um and they're just like could I be doing more? Question mark. Like that's kind of the thing that I feel.
Yeah.
And I have an answer to that, but I'm curious to know what you would recommend.
That's
Happy to answer that question.
I might, yeah, that's really, I've really struggled with that actually. I feel like it's part of me wants to know, it's like, well, what's like your end game? Like what, or not end game, but like, is there something that you are wanting to do on this journey of life? Right. Like, I think for me, I want to be able to have more flexibility and freedom in terms of the choices that I can make. And so I'm always considering what are ways for me to improve my financial literacy or my investment portfolio that might be able to enable me to retire a couple years early, or be able to say, yeah, I'm going to quit that job and take a year off and I'll be okay. And so I kind of wonder, where is it that, where is it that you're at currently with your investments, and where is it that you want to be? Because I know for me, it's that I want to have more freedom. And so for me, what my current, as someone who does now invest, I've actually been moving certain, we have a house down payment that used to just sit in a high yield savings account, and we moved half of it into a robo advisor. Because we know we're not going to buy a house for the next 5 to 10 years. And we think that we could see some gains in that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right? Why is it sitting in, great, I get a high yield savings percentage, but high yield savings percentages are pretty low these days. So why not just actually make more returns off it? And then when I do make that house down payment, I have even more money than I did before. So I think I would say for a current investor, it's kind of looking at what you already have and saying, well, how do I want to push myself just a little bit further and kind of explore something, right? Maybe it's like, okay, I do these things and I keep hearing about crypto, and I'm just going to wade into the waters of it and just maybe open a Coinbase account and just put like $50 in it, right? Like
that's what you just said was what I would recommend. Like, invest more. Like, to my current investors, look at your budget.
Yeah.
See if you can invest more. The answer is yes, invest more.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, that's definitely what we're looking at is like, can we max out the 401k and both of our IRAs and still be okay? Right? Like, can we do that?
This year, I'm all about, because I'm an entrepreneur, I can open up a solo 401k.
Oh,
so I'm like really looking into how I can leverage that. However, I also want to retire early, which is why I'm like, maybe I shouldn't put it in a solo 401k.
Yeah. That's actually why.
And just pay taxes.
That's a big reason why actually we have a dedicated robo advisor account that's supposed to be a supplemental retirement income in case we want to retire early or we might live longer. The world, when you invest, the world is your oyster and it gives you options. I think that's the thing. It gives you options. And in this world, you want to have options.
I think that's a great place to end on.
That's how I felt too.
Right?
Yeah.
I was like, we could talk about this forever, but I know we're at time. Thank you so much for this amazing conversation.
I loved it.
I could be here for hours and not even notice the time go by and talk about this.
I could spend, there's so many other things that we could have talked about, but
yes, there'll be a part 2.
Yes.
So I guess as we wrap up, where can folks find you? I will link everything in the bio section, but
yeah, totally. So you can
shameless plug.
Yes, shameless plug, pennyleague.com. You can sign up for our mailing list. We put out a newsletter each month that kind of breaks down a concept. Breaks down a concept or some way to get started in something. And we also offer like trial boot camps and things of that nature as we kind of experiment with some of our offerings. So if you want to try something out and learn something, come check us out there, sign up for our mailing list. We'll let you know when our offerings drop. And then you can also follow us on Instagram at the pennyleague. And, you can see me doing a silly reel where I try to talk about something.
I'm here for it.
And yeah. So give us a follow. And
Might be
yeah,
rebranded to the Lazy
the
Investor.
lazy
Be on the
investor.
lookout.
Yeah, I wonder if that's taken. I'll check. I'll report back. We'll edit this
Yeah.
after. We'll edit
Yeah.
in post.
Yeah. We'll give you the updates.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Stella.
I will see you later.
Yes.
And thank you all for being here until the end. So many money gems. And yeah, comment all your questions away and let's continue the conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Thank you
All
again
right.
for having me.
Bye.
Bye.